There's an example of one recently where they like to describe the color of this article of clothing as rum.
What's
like
wrong with
alcoholic beverage rum, but that's the color.
That's it.
And that's,
nice
of course, custom sees that word rum, and all of a sudden it changes the whole game. In reality, all that customs really cares about is it a T-shirt, right? And
So AI, how do you help with this?
Yeah. So really, there's 3 questions that you want to answer with that description that you write down on your commercial invoice. You want to write down your description needs to answer what it is made of, and what's it used for, right?
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Zonos Decoding Cross-Border Ecommerce podcast. And we are your hosts, Clint Reid, here with Aaron Bezzant. It's an exciting day because we get to talk about not just HS codes, which we've had this conversation before. And in that podcast, we were so hyped up about learning about how to come up with an HS code. And I think that's what we're going to do today.
I got a little overwhelmed about being able to come up with HS codes for all products and doing that at scale. And so I'm really excited about this podcast.
Well, is it just going to be you and I talking about this?
No way.
No. We've got some special guests today. So Chanel Barnes, product manager at Zonos over Classify, Zonos Classify. And you spend a lot of time here with our head of data science, Jonathan.
Pleasure.
And Jonathan's the one doing the magic in the background with the team on magically coming up with what you want, Aaron, which is determining what an HS code is.
Absolutely.
But when I walked in, right? I mean, you're wearing a hat, which that's a given.
I got a collar.
Well, why are you? Yeah, I've never seen you in a collared shirt, even though apparently Zonos got you one. So why are you dressed up today?
Well, for this podcast, Clint, I wanted to look classy.
Oh.
I won't give a drum roll or anything after that one. That one.
We're just moving
that
on.
one fell flat. Let's carry on.
Well, you had another one too right after that. It was good. Like I knew this one was coming. Chanel didn't.
I want to ask them about all of the proprietary secrets that Zonos has about classification. Can you tell us?
I can't because it's classified.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
We can only go up from here.
Absolutely. Who else can sit around a table and geek out about this stuff? So all the trade geeks out there, eat your heart out. This is going to be a lot of fun today. But yeah, why don't you kick us off with some questions, Aaron, for the team before they ask us some?
Yeah, well, and just to make note, we did go through a whole podcast just talking specifically about HS codes,
right?
Which I think is really relevant. If you're, we might skip over some things. And if you're scratching your head wondering, like, what are they talking about? That podcast is well worth a listen.
But one of the things for that podcast that I think is important, just leading into this, is how many codes, right?
Oh,
There's like, 5,600 HS codes out there.
That's just the universal.
That's just the universal.
That
so
shares.
Back in the day, if you wanted to get all your products, classified, and you have 7,000 SKUs, right? That could be super costly. To do that, times that by $1 or $2. It's a lot cheaper than that now. But man, now you have all these other countries, which we got in the millions.
Yeah.
All right. So how at scale? How do you?
Yeah. And let's talk real quick about the process of what has to happen as goods come into a country. Those higher value shipments, non-e-commerce shipments, someone's already classified those ahead of time, I imagine. And the person shipping or the manufacturer's working with somebody to classify those goods and put a full HS code for the country that those goods are being imported into. But in e-com, there's a lot of times there's HS codes that are missing. I mean, especially in the postal system, and with even express carriers, all these lower value shipments. As I look through a lot of clearance stocks, I'm picturing myself being in a broker's shoes that they're coming up with an HS code on all of these little items coming in, and they're classifying these goods. And I'm thinking to myself, this is painful. As I've gone through the process, we talked about on the HS code podcast, there's a giant book to give you a list of instructions on how to classify goods, right? And I can just picture somebody thumbing through a book, or maybe they have some online tools, but they're still manually going through, looking at a product, looking at the the harmonized system and trying to figure out which one it is specific to their country that it's coming in, right? Am I thinking right on that's kind of how it works? Like, how do you come up with an HS code in general when you're needing to come up with one?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that process is becoming less and less manual, maybe over the last decade or so. But prior to that, and even still, it is you have an object and you open that book and you start at the chapter and then you dig your way down depending on the country. And it can take a broker hours and hours to come up with a single HS code. So to Clint's point, you think about doing that for a catalog of 7,000 items. I mean, you're looking at years of work, a lot of work to just assign those HS codes.
There's got to be a better way, Chanel, right?
You would think.
Yeah. So we've certainly invested a lot into trying to understand how people do this, how the experts in the field, these customs brokers, go through and apply that giant text to be able to understand what a particular product is. And fortunately, there are a lot of patterns that we can abstract from how they go about doing this. The first of which is, one, it's hierarchical, meaning you don't have to classify to the most granular code right away. Instead, the best practice is to start at the top, start at the highest level, at the chapter, actually the section. It's a group of chapters, and classify which section does this item correspond to. And then you go down into the chapter, and then within the chapter, you look at various indents and, this gets back to the print days when you would print this out. You'd print out this schedule. You'd have codes indented, or actually sometimes not even codes, but just, sections of text indented. What you do is you first classify to one level, then you look at all the things that are indented one tab, right? One group of spaces in, and they're going to be spread across, I don't know, many pages sometimes, and you say, okay, which of these across these 7 pages is the right code for it best describes the item? Okay, let me grab that and let me continue that process going down the chain. And you might have, maybe if you're lucky, there's 3 indents that you have to go through to get to your code, but in many cases it's 6, 7, sometimes 8 indents. So 8 levels of classifications that you have to do to get to that code, and that's a lot of labor. That's a lot of attention to detail that needs to happen to get those. But it's a pattern that we can understand and we can follow for automating this process as well.
Well, and if I look at the manual classification, if we go back in history, it made perfect sense. Mm-hmm. It could totally justify itself for someone to spend a few minutes or even an hour on a big bulk shipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that's going to be moving on a cargo ship into a particular country, right? And you classify the goods on there, and away we go. But it seems that things have radically changed with e-commerce, because what you have is, instead of the manufacturer shipping their goods into a country to then get sold for retail sale within that country, now the sale is happening online, mm-hmm. and now you've got microtransactions happening where the goods are moving across. These low-value shipments are coming across the border that still need HS codes, and you have to be able to do it at scale at that point. Now it's not just one classification for a giant container ship. It's you're classifying over and over and over and over again for all of these tiny shipments, and the parties involved in that transaction aren't necessarily the manufacturer or somebody that fully understands the product. These are someone that's reselling the goods that they bought from someone else, and they may not have an HS code. They typically don't know the HS code for it.
They typically don't know what an HS code is.
That's accurate. That's accurate as well. Yeah. So you've got a lot of different parties involved, as well as just the volume of classifications that need to happen is radically changed over the last couple of decades with e-commerce.
You were saying, a lot of times they don't know what it is. So why do they need it, right? So why is this important that if the brokers are taking care of it, why, who are these other parties that apparently need a classification, right? Obviously, it's not working at scale. I mean, that obviously kind of makes sense. But why is there even a need for automation in this industry at all?
If there isn't an HS code, you're saying?
Yeah, well, if I don't need to put it on, look, I'm selling online when when I was a sales rep and selling shipping, services internationally, I'd go in there and it's like, you don't need the HS code on that. Don't worry about that. Just get your paperwork done. It'll ship, it'll clear, and it'll get delivered. But what's changed? And maybe this is, this could be a question for Aaron, because I think, Aaron, what has changed here? Why is this so important now?
Well, the HS code, I'm just going to give an answer, but I think there's probably more than one answer to this. But I think a big one, as we've seen, the evolution of the buyer's expectation. So, and by buyer, I mean the shopper. When they were buying from another country back in the day, everything was just sent to where when it cleared, I'd have to pay duty and tax, and I didn't know what I was doing. And that's caused a lot of problems, having the duty and tax collected upon delivery. And so more and more, e-commerce is pushing to collecting those duty and taxes at the time of checkout. And to really get accurate and understand the calculations of how much to charge at checkout, you need an HS code. Right. I'd say that's one of the big things, but also understanding your products in general, what you can and can't ship different places. And really the HS code's an anchor point for a number of decisions that can be made. So
shopper experience was a big one, right? That being driven by the shopper, and it's interesting that's causing it, because in order to calculate duties and taxes earlier in the process, you have to come up with that code. And all of a sudden it puts the burden on the seller to figure this out. But there's a second one, which is also an important one, which is compliance. So ICS2, right? So there's also this push to, with ICS2, to force upon the exporter that's going into Europe, correct? To have a harmonized code with that shipment. And so now you have a lot of logistics providers that are tasked with, they're not a broker, but their seller didn't provide an HS code, so they can either go to the shipper, right? They could either go to the shipper and ask them to make sure it's on there, which they do a lot of times, or they have to figure out a way to get a code on there. And a good example of this might be the United States Postal Service, right? It's public that they're a customer of ours, and when you go to a retail counter, Chanel, if you're no, not you. Maybe your grandma goes to the retail counter and ships something out. You would be able to put an HS code on there. They're not going to be able to do that. Neither is a person at the counter. So it's required in order to get that with ICS2 into Europe. And I know it's been delayed a little bit with some things, but they're going to need a code, and that's on USPS and the product that you guys have built to ensure that code is on that document.
Right. And some of the other issues that shippers experience or merchants experience is, if they have an HS code, that's one. But if they don't have an HS code, or that HS code's incorrect and customs flags that, they're likely going to maybe even be frustrated and just, why not tack them with an HS code that's going to result in higher duties?
So the broker might pick a higher
right, so they
duty
can
rate.
make more money from a business perspective. Or if there's not an HS code or it's incorrect, they're oftentimes, one of the most common results is it will result in delays. They'll throw it in another pile, they'll send it to another team, and then as a shopper, you're waiting, like, what a poor shopper experience, and then be waiting a couple more days, being charged with additional duties and taxes upon delivery. It's just can result in a frustrating experience, both for the shopper and for the shipper, the merchant.
Yeah, so I think overall it sounds like having an HS code up front can help with a ton of different things to create the whole experience, or make a much better experience for everyone involved.
But the 6 is the 6 enough, or are you talking getting the country level?
Well, that's a good question. I imagine having the 6 is really important. At least having that.
But that commonly, I think merchants in the past would just throw a 6-digit code on there and be like, or they'll throw in usually a Canadian country code and use that across the world for everywhere. But
yeah, and you could. And if it's lower value or low volume, or you're a smaller merchant, you might be okay. But depending on the country, again, to my previous example, some countries, if you only have a 6-digit, if you're shipping a toy, one of those subheadings that has a ton of tariff options typically, if I was a customs broker in, let's say, Korea, that has a ton of country-specific codes under toys, I'm going to say, well, I don't know what this toy is. I'm going to pick this code because the duties on it are a lot higher than all the other codes. And
that seems to be the trend that I've seen in the past too, is they're going to pick the most revenue-generating code in the mix.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. So now back to, okay, we got to automate this, right?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the just a classification process for it. If a human has to sit down and manually go through and classify something, I believe there's the GRI, I think is what we talked about, them being called on our last podcast around HS codes, which is really a set of rules, is my understanding of how someone should logically go through the steps of picking the particular, the right HS code. Because isn't it true that there's a lot of subjectivity and there's room for interpretation around, I've got multiple codes that could be right, and how do I go about picking which one is the actual appropriate code? Yeah. What's that process look like?
Yeah, so there are some best practices of what to do in those situations, and as you mentioned, the general rules of interpretability, GRIs. Those are guidelines issued by the WCO, and each country can and sometimes does add their own addendums to those rules. But generally speaking, you want to start hierarchical in nature, so you'll start at some level of the hierarchy, and you'll classify the item among which fits best. And they always say the most specific. If more than one category or code could apply, always pick the one that's most specific, right? So if something is, let's say it's made of wood, right? But it's a statue, it's like a wood carving. Then that would go under statuettes more than articles of wood, right? And so you'll go, and those generally tend to be the larger numbers, the more processed goods. They tend to be more specific, but really the guiding principle is the most specific category is the one you should pick. And so you kind of do that recursively as you traverse down the hierarchy until you get to a fully qualified code. And then there's some exceptions about how to handle bundles or mixtures or whatnot that just further complicate the story as well.
But like you said, there is a lot of subjectivity to it, and some of the best practices in classifying are to be able to come up with a rationale or a defense should you ever experience any issues. For example, let's say you had an alarm clock by your bedstand that was also like a radio and maybe had a lamp attached to it. You could classify that as a lamp or a radio or an alarm clock because they kind of all serve even functions. And if you can defend that, neither of those three HS codes are going to be wrong because you have a rationale behind it, because there is a lot of subjectivity to it. Or another example is if you are shipping a t-shirt can have, I don't know, a dozen maybe different HS codes. Is it men's or women's? Is it woven or knitted? And if you can defend, hey, I didn't have all the information, and so I assumed, that it was a woven men's t-shirt, but really it was maybe a women's knitted t-shirt, you're probably going to be okay because it's reasonable and it's subjective.
Reasonable is probably the key word in this, right? Like, as long as you're being honest and trying to be reasonable about what you're doing, then you're probably going to be okay.
Right. If you're not classifying your Rolex as a t-shirt, there's a difference between those two.
Yeah, or a toy.
Yeah. Okay. I really am excited to talk about artificial intelligence. Okay. Because, and we could talk about more about, just kind of the manual, like how the process works, but what role is it playing? I mean, you've now been at Zonos now for
little over 2 years now.
Little over 2 years. And you had, a lot of experience in data science before then. And since you've come on, there's been a lot of change in artificial intelligence. Sure. It's been super exciting. And so tell us a little bit about the process that you go through in order to determine what the correct harmonized code is based on the description that you're given. And that description, by the way, can depend on, sometimes there's two descriptions. We are most of the times dealing with the e-commerce description, I would say. That's probably more regular, but we also, actually, I don't know if it's, maybe it's split, but we also do a ton of what was actually put on the commercial invoice or the declaration. Yes. So both of which are two totally different types of description. So dive in. Sure. Tell me about artificial intelligence, and how it helps solve this problem.
Sure. So let me just make sure we all understand the magnitude of the problem. So we talked about over 5,500 roughly subheadings, right, that you might want to classify this to. There's country-specific codes, and those country-specific codes change nearly every day. So we acquire data as to how these countries have changed it from first-party, third-party data sources, but nearly every day, at least one country is saying, you know what, we know we used to care about this for this particular subheading. We don't, and we care about this other thing to divide up that.
So is that in the form of adding and removing HS codes?
Adding, removing, changing.
They can do it at any time. Unlike the 6-digit universal that gets changed once every 5 years.
Yeah.
This is highly dynamic by country, happening on a daily basis.
Right. And so that influences dramatically the ways in which you can go about solving this problem. And so there's maybe two traditional ways of trying to solve a problem like this. There's one where you might try to build, in the traditional sense, a classifier. That is to say, you build something that assigns it a label, and those labels are generally static, known ahead of time, and you have lots of examples of things that are with that label. And so, you see this with actually the first machine learning tool algorithm is all analog, and it was used to differentiate between a square and a circle. And they had lights that would shine on a screen, right? And it would either be a square or a circle, and they would change. They would tell the machine this is a square, and they would manually tune knobs, literal knobs of gain on each one of those photo sensors to then make it more like a square, more like a circle, to have it estimated as one or the other. And so you need to have examples of squares and circles in that particular case ahead of time, and you need to have a static set of labels too in that particular case. And so that could work if you wanted to rebuild your system every 5 years. Maybe you could do that to the subheading
We've seen
level.
systems like that out there, in this industry and historically, yeah.
And people approach it this way, but the problem is they're super brittle, right? And because they can't be dynamic, the reference data will change. The GRIs may not change, but the actual codes themselves will change, right? And you get these all the time, and so you can't approach it that particular way. Maybe there's another way in which we've seen these types of problems solved as well, which is maybe more akin to what humans do, a zero-shot or maybe few-shot classification, where you have maybe a list of categories and you've got maybe a description of an item, and you go and you try to say, okay, which of these best fit here? And the wonderful thing about a kind of a zero or few-shot learning is that you have the flexibility because you're not pre-baking that reference data. You're now bringing that in at time of classification. You can be a lot more dynamic with it. The trouble is these tend to be weak learners. And so they're not really going to be super great at getting the right answer all the time without a lot of strong emphasis on natural language processing. And that's where we've really seen the revolution in the past year or year and a half or so, is a lot of really exciting development on understanding natural language and being able to process that in a way that allows for extensible uses all over many industries, including ours. And so that's been really exciting to be able to see and take part of. But then you have to balance that with understanding that, a lot of this is static and a lot of this is known ahead of time. And so we've
kind of like the universal side, it's pretty known, static. Yeah.
That's not going to change very much. And so we can do a lot of creative things to be able to try to get the best of those both worlds, of that static, really known ahead of time, with strong classifiers versus these weaker zero-shot or few-shot classifiers that will be able to kind of work with the dynamic nature of that reference data. And so that's where a lot of our effort has been focused on. How do we get the best of both of these worlds and make it such that we can handle the arbitrary changes that are going to happen while still providing that very, very strong universal support.
Without giving away anything proprietary, so if I ask a question that's too detailed, but maybe a little bit about the models and things that are available out there, or maybe that or do you build your own, right? Yep. The LLMs, right? There's a lot of different things out there that can help drive. But I think we do a great job at Zonos of creating, I think, amazing products that work. Mm-hmm. And sometimes not the best job at really. We've been doing AI for a while now, yes. And so I think it's really important for us to, and for you, and for any if anyone's listening and maybe they want to build their own or whatever. But just what what, you've done some different approaches, and how have you kind of landed at, and what have you had to build in order to get this scalable?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you mentioned large language models. The most one that people are probably familiar with is ChatGPT, right? And that's the one that's kind of come out in the last year and a half or so and kind of changed a lot of things and really brought AI to the forefront of most people's understanding. And you can, if you want, you can go do this experiment. You can go to ChatGPT and you can type in what is the HS code for such and such, and it'll produce a plausibly sounding 6-digit code. It might even throw 4 more digits at the end. Maybe it'll give you a 10-digit code. But what we found is that in many cases, those codes are fictitious. They don't exist.
Right. It's not pulling from a data source. It's predicting the next digit.
And really that gets to what these large language models are trained to do. They're trained to guess what is plausible sounding as the next word. And they do that over and over and over again. And so really all it's trying to do is it's trying to create a code that you might say, yeah, that's probably right, because that's exactly what it's trained to do. It's trained to create language that is plausibly sounding and sometimes creative, right? And you'll write great poems, and to write a poem, it has to be plausibly sounding. There's no factual accuracy for that. But it does suffer from hallucinations, right? And we hear this term a lot with large language models, with ChatGPT and whatnot. And so that's really one of the major challenges to using that type of technology for this, and why you probably just can't go and grab that off-the-shelf tool and say, okay, I'm going to go use that as my engine, because you'll run into a lot of these situations where, one, it doesn't understand, doesn't have memorized the harmonized tariff schedule for a particular country. But two, even if it did, it's not trying to get accurate. It's trying to get plausible sounding, and that's really one of the downsides to using those type of tools natively. Now, that said, the technology behind them, which are these, and they use the term transformers. It's the actual engine that the change has been made to how we process language. And there's a lot of mathematics that we won't get into in this podcast, but that engine is really, really powerful. And we've been actually using transformers in our Zonos built classification models for many years prior to ChatGPT coming on the scene. Because they're really powerful at understanding the context-dependent nature of natural language. And so that's where we've seen a lot of investment here. And we tend to build off the shoulders, that stand on the shoulders of giants, and build. We don't want to reinvent understanding English. That's not a good use of our time. We want to build off of the understanding of natural language and apply that to this particular domain where we see very little attention, which is cross-border shipments.
And then the tool Zonos Classify, right, which can be used. We have different options to use this product, but one is you can just log into our dashboard and Chanel explain what someone can do with Classify. Maybe this is the UI portion, and then Jonathan, I maybe like you to talk a little bit about as well the needs for speed here. Sure. Sometimes important, sometimes not. But maybe let's start there, Chanel. Like, how does it actually function and work, and what are they using? Because Classify does more than just give a code. Like, there's a few other things we're doing there.
Yeah. One of the first things we always tell our merchants or clients when interested in Classify and how accurate are our classifications and so on is that we need good data. The better the data, the better our results are going to be. And we've done a really great job of building a tool to support all types of data requests, and in return, a lot of different options in what you can get back in addition to
and when you talk about data, what type of data are we talking about?
Like, there's a lot of times postal, and for understandable reasons, typically has the weakest data. You'll get like t-shirt or gift basket or so on. But what is much preferred is having a name, a description, a category, a material.
So e-commerce data is a little more rich usually than what you're getting from.
Yes.
And the richer
we get images, right? We can also
images too. Yes, of course. Detailed descriptions are also really helpful. So the more data, the better. And our tools allow for all different sorts of
So you can
input
just
fields.
log in the tool, you can just put in description and then add additional attributes, right? You can
Right.
add in the category, the image URL, right? We'll process that
Right.
and then outputs the 6, and then as well, if they want,
Yep.
then in that case they have to put in the country, right?
Yep.
The destination country.
Yep. So in our dashboard, you can request a single request, so just one at a time and putting the information, or you can do a bulk CSV request, all the same input fields. And if a destination country isn't supplied, we'll just default to returning the 6-digit code. But if a country is supplied, then as Jonathan spoke about, I think on the last podcast, depending on the country, it'll vary between some countries actually don't have any tariff codes, so it'll just be the 6-digit, but it'll go up to 12, 14, most commonly 10 digits if a country is provided. But we have some additional really cool features like classify alternates, where it's especially helpful if you have more vague descriptions, like the t-shirt example, that'll say like, okay, is it a men's t-shirt, a women's t-shirt, kid's t-shirt, is it woven, is it knitted?
So the UI
gives
is
them
giving you those
options.
alternate options.
Correct.
To the description that you put in. It's saying, okay, here's what we think it probably is. And then are you scoring this then somehow? Like how is that working?
Yeah, we do have a confidence scoring that's entropy-based confidence scoring. And Jonathan, you can talk more about that.
Yeah. So really, what we're doing when we classify this is we say, hey, it could be any of these, the codes. Let's imagine we're going to the 6 digits, right? So it's a universal code. There's 5,600 or so options, right, give or take. And what we do is we calculate a probability that it could be any one of those codes, right? And so you get this probability distribution of 5,600 items, and one of them is hopefully going to be very dominant, and most of them, it's probably not that, right? And we take that distribution, we use information theory. It's kind of some fancy math principle, but it's essentially trying to quantify the uncertainty left in that distribution. And we calculate a confidence score based off of that entropy, 0 to 1. And then we tag it with high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence, etc. So you can know.
So for a user, pretty simple. Or if you
Super
tied into API, you could then put in some of your own triggers based on the confidence score. If you want to do some additional, set these one aside to look at, separately or something like that.
Exactly. We find that very valuable because, as Chanel said, some of the descriptions that you might provide, maybe they are conflicting, right? And so we see this sometimes where the name of the item says one thing, but the categories that you provided say something completely different. So you might have something that says a mug, right? It describes a mug that you drink from, but the category might say bedroom furniture, right? And that's conflicting information. And so naturally, you would expect the confidence of any classification built on that to be much lower. And in fact, you will get lower confidence. So you can say, hey, let me look at that. There might be a problem with my input data. Maybe I want to review that. Maybe not. I can't just take this to the bank. I need some more scrutiny. Or maybe you're comfortable with that uncertainty that's left and you let it ride because that makes sense for you and your business.
Right. Yeah, because we see sometimes where people do exactly that. They just need the code to get it out, and it's not going to get a lot of scrutiny, so they just get something on there.
Yeah, that's typically common in post. As Aaron said, there's such a huge volume.
Yep.
They don't have time to, really dig into every product that's being shipped. So they have their confidence score with Classify set at 0, and they're like, we just want a code. But then we have others that may, not have that type of risk tolerance, and we'll set it at 40% so that those are flagged, and it gives them a great, at least like head start from a classification perspective. But then, I don't know, typically 80% of their classifications will just go right through, and then they're only stuck having to maybe review or manually classify 20% of them or so.
And then what if someone already has a code, right? That's pretty often too. People come in with codes. And so what options, do we have for that?
So we have 2 options for that. We have a validation option where a user can provide their HS code, and we simply check with the WCO and our country-specific data to ensure it's an accurate code. And
So
we'll
up
let
or
the user
down,
know,
looks good.
Yep, whether or not it's accurate. If it's inaccurate, we can just tell them it's inaccurate, or we can just classify based on the other details they provide. And we also have a coherency check where it kind of does a little bit of both. It first checks the validation to ensure it's a valid code, and if it is valid, then it additionally checks the HS code provided with the details to provided to make sure that those match. And similarly, we kind of let them know, yes, whether it's coherent, incoherent, and if it's incoherent, then we'll just classify again based off of the details they
and
provided.
coherence is hey, did you classify a watch as a T-shirt? And they'd be
Right.
like, nah, this isn't looking
This
good.
is
This Rolex is not a toy.
Yeah, okay.
reasonable, right? That was what you,
Yeah.
I think, talked about. We talked about in the earlier podcast is, does this seem reasonable? And that's kind of the coherency check, right? You're just checking, is the code valid? And does this seem reasonable that with the current with the classification? Would that be
That's absolutely correct. And we err on the side of trusting in that case. So if it's like, hey, you gave me the word clothing, that was your description, and you picked the HS code for a scarf. Yeah, a scarf is clothing. Like, there's no reason for me to disbelieve that. We'll let that go through. However, if you gave the description of clothing, but you gave me the HS code for automotive parts, yeah, well, that's going to be flagged. That's not correct. There's no way those two align.
So would you say the whole goal of the AI and the technology is to train it to think like a human classifier? Is that kind of the main objective?
Yes. So we want it to be indistinguishable from a customs broker's assessment, right? So we want it to be producing results like a human does.
at the speed of?
At the speed of milliseconds. We're typically targeting 150 milliseconds for our average response time here.
Wait.
Okay, so I'll give you like 1,000 things.
150 milliseconds?
Yep. So that's about 1/6 of a second, right? Give or take.
on a single classification.
For a single classification.
Which that might get okay, so if I give you like 1 million codes, that's still going to take a long time, right?
Yeah, we'll chug through them. We can do a lot in parallel as well, so that we don't have to do them all serially, one at a time. But from the time that you give me a single code, I should be able to get
But in a
code
bulk
back to you.
request, like someone uploads something into the dashboard, let's say a big list, we can then run those in parallel, multiple different requests, instead of just synchronously running them,
and that's
one
what we
after
do.
another.
Yeah, we can run on average maybe like a million if you're uploading a bulk CSV request. 1 million, maybe do a couple countries in less than an hour.
Probably a few hours.
So maybe an hour if it's universal.
Sure.
So,
I was getting there.
one thing I think, and this is really vital for e-commerce companies, right? And I know this podcast is super deep, but something that I love that we built with classification is the quality descriptions, right? And that is also AI driven. So here you get an input that's e-commerce oriented, and it says, I don't know what it, maybe it's described as a pop singer or something, but it's actually a shirt.
Well, we're talking in e-commerce.
Yes.
There's a ton of descriptions that are used, for marketing and sales purposes.
Right.
That get really creative and fancy with the description, which is also ultra confusing for a human that's trying to clear it through customs. Right? That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. You have this dilemma where on the commercial invoice, the thing that you write down the code and what's in the box, the description of it, you only have so many characters to write down and describe your item. And so as an e-commerce merchant, I don't have short descriptions. I have nice verbose descriptions so that people can understand what my product is when I'm selling it to them. I don't have a great way of condensing that down to 50 characters. And so what a lot of people do is they'll just take the first 50 characters of their product name and you get like royal, lunchbox or whatever. And it's like, that's nice, but it's you've wasted a lot of that text.
And it gets truncated.
There's an example of one recently where they like to describe the color of this article of clothing as rum.
What's
like
wrong
the
with
alcoholic beverage rum, but that's the color.
That's
and that's
nice color.
Of course, custom sees that word rum, and all of a sudden it changes the whole game. In reality, all that customs really cares about is it a T-shirt, right? And
so AI, how do you help with this?
Yeah. So really, there's 3 questions that you want to answer with that description that you write down on your commercial invoice. You want to write down your description needs to answer what it is it made of, and what's it used for, right? And so a lot of these marketing or creative color names or whatnot, they're really helpful for the user to understand, but they don't answer those questions very well. In fact, they confuse a lot of people when they answer those questions. And so what we've built as part of our classification tool is we can return what we call a customs description, a description that you can take, stick on that commercial invoice. It'll be guaranteed to be under a certain size so that it'll fit within there. You don't have to truncate or do anything special yourself. And it summarizes your item such that those 3 questions are answered, and you can take that with the HS code provided and that will supply you, and that'll be cause much less problems than however you choose to truncate or summarize them on your own. So what we find is that is those 2 put together are a really powerful tool to ensuring a quick and fast customs clearance process.
So you get the description of nothing but rum, or maybe that's what, and then it's in a t-shirt category. You see the image of the t-shirt, so you're able to classify it accurately.
Yes.
And that's going to output as what would be?
That'll probably output as maybe it's a unisex t-shirt, right? Might be the description that you'll get from that. If we know, depending on what is in the actual product information that you gave us, we might be able to say, hey, it's a men's t-shirt, it's a women's t-shirt, whatnot. But we'll describe it as well as we can, but really we'll cut out all that marketing stuff, which is super important for your customers, but really confusing for the customers.
Cut out the fluff.
And it's important too that you may actually classify it correctly at checkout, but it might get classified or change the code, right, at customs clearance because you put a code on there that doesn't match the description.
Exactly.
And we had more data at the time when we determined the code. So it's really important. This is where I think the quality descriptions that we're generating with AI are super important to the whole clearance process. And as important as just getting the right code on there, you have to have a description that matches the code that's reasonable, right? Yeah.
That's fascinating. So you've got this AI tool that you're building to think like a human, not building, you built, and it sounds like it's constantly evolving and improving. But it can think like a human to classify something. You can use a confidence score to know when to ask questions, which I think happens in the real world all the time with brokers. They may have to reach out and get more information on a product. And you can also use it to validate if an HS code's good and if the HS code even matches the description. That sounds extremely powerful, but I go back to, I sat in a training once on classification years ago, and it was an old timer.
I'd love to have been in that training. I'm curious what it was.
Well, they talked about automation.
Okay.
And this person's stance is it'll never be automated completely. So today it sounds like it's a combination of automation and manual. It sounds like there's some real world scenarios where getting a human involved is still needed.
Yes.
Do you ever see it being completely automated in the future?
That's a great question. I have a feeling you were going to ask this, so I've been thinking about it quite a bit. Yes, and here's where I say it's automated today, depending on your risk tolerance, right? And it all goes back to how high the stakes are, right? If you're shipping low value goods, fully automated solution, you plug and play, you're good to go. There's no manual intervention needed. If you're shipping container loads of goods today, you're going to get a lot more scrutiny. And so you want to be much more thorough with that. And in some cases, we can do those, right? We can do those and get the right codes and you're off to the races. In other cases, you might want to be a little bit more cautious, right? However, what we've been seeing is that movement to over the last, let's say, 3 years from the types of products and goods and industries for which this tool is fully automated is moving, and now more and more and more are going in that way. Now, so I do think there is a day where even container loads of goods that require full audit trails to go and document exactly why and how we got to this particular code and the assumption that we had to make and this, that, the other thing, that can all be documented, created, and then maybe reviewed or approved by a broker, or maybe and be fully automated from that sense. And now it's just like a review and approval process after that. And I don't think we're very far from that either. I think that what you'll see is over the next few years, you'll see continued investments there, and you just might be surprised at how well we pass the Turing test, how well these machines are able to think and act, like you said, like a broker over the next few years. Is it tomorrow? I don't know that it's tomorrow. Is it next year? Maybe. Is it a few years from now? It could be, but I do think that day is coming.
Well, I look at how fast just when we had the big ChatGPT boom,
Sure.
right? And then it turned into a frenzy. And how long ago was that?
Year and a half ago.
Yep.
The evolution just in the last year and a half, and the kind of the general adoption of AI in society is mind blowing. How quickly that's moved. So I can't even imagine where we'd be a few years from now.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I think to getting to this point though is there has to be changes in laws to make this happen, right? Because it's requiring brokers, and so I think the risk tolerance has to be brought down to a point where that country trusts that I think two things need to happen. One, the correct classification occurs, but two, that they trust the data sources that went into that classification. And that's where I think images are so important to this. And I can see them playing a huge role, right, in the future. I mean, why shouldn't a commercial invoice have an image URL on there, right? And being passed in the data stream that's validated against, it just seems like once customs can trust the data, right, that it matches the sell of the goods, and these countries believe actually what's coming in is what they're told, I see that happening. Until that happens, though, it doesn't matter how much automation you put in there, there's always a skeptical eye, right? They're going to be pulling those packages aside, checking what's inside, which is still going to happen just for security reasons. But I think that's a big challenge.
But even the inspection, knowing what to inspect,
right?
And knowing how to target the shipments properly for bad offenders who you should open a box and see if it really is what they're saying it is.
If it really is a toy watch or a Rolex.
If it really is a toy watch or a Rolex, yes. I think there's such a massive opportunity in cross-border in general for AI to make the whole process much more
There is no
efficient.
technological limitation here, I don't think, going forward. But and it's exciting. I mean, you talked about the audit trails. We won't go into that, I think, today, just due to time. But I mean, you've been working on, and we kind of we haven't yet released it, but audit trails, right? The ability to generate that, and these tools are there. I mean, they're there for whether a broker wants to just or wants to use our API, or they can log in, or maybe it's there's so much available right now at your fingertips to be able to pull this off, and it is vastly different than it even was 12 months ago, right? 18 months ago, 24 months ago, especially.
Oh yeah, I mean, not to air classifies dirty laundry, but 2 years ago, I remember one of our classifications we classified that we had issues with. We classified mules as mules, like live animals, and we had just huge, just issues at customs coming back, and their shoes and.
Those mules.
Oh,
okay.
those kind of mules. Sorry, I'm in a room with three men. They're like women's shoes.
Wait, can you buy them at Costco? Because that's the only kind of clothing I know.
And we had a really frustrated customer, obviously, because Classify was in its early stages, and this was way before Jonathan and our AI functionality, and we had lots of issues like that.
Yeah.
Like the rum colors. Oatmeal T-shirt. We just had issues all over the place that we now. I mean, the AI it is also just so much more sustainable and scalable than what we were doing before we had AI. We were doing keywords all day. It was just brutal.
We had a file come in the other day, and I won't say but it was classified by another provider, right? And we went through this file, and I think we reclassified correctly what it seemed like. At least, reasonably correctly, like going kind of that interpretation, about 60 to 70% of that file.
Yes.
And so the advances that we've made and the investment that we've made here have been impressive. Usually this is not a Zonos specific podcast. It's usually, kind of about the industry and stuff, but I think it's been really important today to summarize what we've been doing with AI and how it works, because as you're looking for, the ability to do this, the challenge you're going to run into if you just go and throw something in an LLM and just randomly get some number back, and you're like, I'll take it. So, but I think we're anything else that's been on your mind that we totally missed, because this was fascinating for me.
No, it's been a real pleasure to be here, Clint. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
All right.
Guys.
Thanks, Chanel. Aaron, you hosted extremely well again.
You did an amazing job today. Absolutely amazing
Thanks.
job.
I'm trying to hey guys. Hey, thanks again. All right.
Okay.
Until
Thanks,
next
everyone.
time.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.